Have you ever woken up one morning to realize that the child you raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for has turned you into nothing more than an asset to be managed? I'm Eleanor Ellie Grant, and at 79 years old, I found myself standing in the sterile lobby of Maple Crest Care, watching my son Daniel flash that practiced smile he'd perfected in his corporate job. "It's just temporary, Mom," he said, his voice smooth as honey but cold as winter. "Just to make sure you're safe." The sound that followed, that metallic click of the facility's front door locking behind me, was small, almost insignificant. But to me, it sounded like the door to my entire life slamming shut. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes but a job to do, looked up from her clipboard and said matter-of-factly, "You're all checked in, Mrs. Grant. Your son has power of attorney." Power of attorney. Three words that had somehow transformed me from Eleanor Grant, a woman who'd worked double shifts at the diner for 30 years, who'd raised Daniel single-handedly after his father died, who'd scrimped and saved to put him through college, into a check-in item on someone else's to-do list. But here's what Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew. I wasn't done writing my story. That little yellow house at 117 Danner Street, filled with decades of memories and dreams, wasn't going anywhere without a fight. And neither was I. This is the story of how I took back my name, my dignity, and delivered justice so sweet it still makes me smile 3 years later. Let me take you back to understand how I got here, because every betrayal has its roots in trust that was planted too deep. For 37 years, I was married to Thomas Grant, a good man who worked construction until his hands were too arthritic to hold a hammer. We lived modestly in our yellow house on Danner Street, the kind of neighborhood where you knew everyone's dog's name and borrowed sugar over the fence. When Thomas passed from lung cancer in 1998, Daniel was just 22, fresh out of college with dreams bigger than our little town could hold. "Don't worry about me, Mom," he'd said at the funeral, straightening his new tie. "I'll take care of you when you need it." I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. The next 2 decades, I watched Daniel build his life. He moved to the city, married Marissa, a sharp woman with manicured nails and a way of looking at our modest furniture like it was contaminated. They had success written all over them. The sleek car, the downtown condo, the kind of life I dreamed of giving Daniel but never could afford. I stayed in the yellow house, working at Mel's Diner until I was 73, serving coffee to the same faces I'd known for decades. Every penny I didn't spend on groceries or utilities went into a little account I called Daniel's Someday Fund. Money for when he might need help with a house down payment, or when grandchildren came along, or when life threw him one of those curveballs it loves to pitch. Daniel visited regularly in those early years. He'd bring Marissa for Sunday dinners, and she'd compliment my pot roast while scrolling through her phone. He'd walk through the house, making little mental notes about repairs needed, asking if I was managing okay on my own. "This place is getting too big for you, Mom," became his favorite refrain. "All these stairs, the yard work. What if you fall and nobody finds you for days?" I'd laugh it off. "I've been managing just fine, honey. Mrs. Patterson next door checks on me every morning. I've got my routines." But the visits changed after Daniel's promotion to regional manager 3 years ago. The conversation shifted from, "How are you feeling?" to, "Have you thought about what you want to do with the house?" From, We worry about you being alone. 2. Marissa found this great facility that has everything you could need. The warning signs were there, small as breadcrumbs, on a trail I was too trusting to follow. The way Daniel started handling my insurance paperwork without asking, how he volunteered to help with my banking to make things easier. The questions about my will that felt more like an inventory than concern for my well being. You know, Mom, if something happened to you, we'd need to know where all your important papers are, Marissa had said last Christmas, her voice casual as she helped with dishes. It would be so much easier if Daniel could just handle things now while you're still, sharp? Still sharp, as if my mind was a knife getting duller with each passing day. I'd lived through the Depression as a child, raised a son alone, worked every day until my feet swelled and my back ached, managed a household budget that would make a mathematician weep. I'd negotiated with bill collectors, fought insurance companies, and made a dollar stretch further than it had any right to go. But somehow, in their eyes, I'd become fragile, vulnerable, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. I should have seen it coming. The careful conversations, the helpful suggestions, the way they started making decisions for my own good without including me in the process. I should have seen it. But love makes you blind to the very people who should never betray you. The morning that changed everything started like any other Thursday at Maple Crest Care. I'd been there exactly 17 days. Not that anyone was counting except me. The routine was as predictable as sunrise. Breakfast at 7:30, medications at 9, activities at 10:30, lunch at noon, and then the long, empty stretch of afternoon that felt like purgatory dressed up as elder care. I was in my assigned room, a sterile box with industrial carpet and a window that looked out onto the parking lot, when I decided to unpack the last of my belongings. Daniel had brought me 3 suitcases and assured me that everything else would be taken care of. What he meant, I was learning, was that my entire life had been reduced to what could fit in 3 pieces of luggage. My fingers found the pocket of my old winter coat, the navy wool one I'd worn to Thomas's funeral, and kept because it still held the faintest trace of his aftershave. That's when I felt it, a crinkle of paper tucked deep in the inner pocket. A lottery ticket? Powerball. I'd bought it weeks ago at Murphy's Corner store, part of my Thursday routine when I picked up milk and bread. I'd chosen the same numbers I'd been playing for 20 years. Thomas's birthday, Daniel's birthday, our anniversary, the date we bought the house, and the random number 7, because Thomas always said it was lucky. For a moment, I just stared at it. In the fluorescent lighting of my new home, that little slip of paper looked almost magical. Not because I thought I'd won. Lord knows I'd never won more than $10 in my life. But because it was mine, something Daniel and Marissa hadn't inventoried, cataloged, or decided, was too much for me to handle. The drawing was 2 nights ago, Wednesday. I'd been so overwhelmed with the trauma of being deposited at Maple Crest that I'd completely forgotten about it. Mrs. Grant? Sandy, the day nurse, appeared in my doorway with that practiced smile they all wore. Time for your afternoon medications. I slipped the ticket into my pocket. Of course, dear. As Sandy handed me the little paper cup with pills I wasn't entirely sure I needed, I made a decision. I was going to check that ticket. Not because I expected anything, but because I needed to do something, anything, that was entirely my own choice. The rec room had an old computer, supposedly for keeping residents connected with family. Most days, it sat unused while people played endless rounds of bingo or watched The Price is Right on repeat. But that afternoon, I claimed it. My hands shook slightly as I navigated to the lottery website. The numbers swam before my eyes, and, for a terrifying moment, I wondered if Daniel and Marissa had been right. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe I couldn't handle simple tasks anymore. But then the numbers came into focus: 7, 14, 23, 29, 31, 47. I looked at my ticket: 7, 14, 23, 29, 31, 47. I looked again. The numbers matched, every single one. I stared at the screen so long that it started to blur. Then I looked at the ticket again, certain I was making a mistake. But there they were, those 6 numbers that had just turned my world upside down. $62 million. I sat there in that little plastic chair, surrounded by the institutional beige walls and the smell of industrial disinfectant, holding a piece of paper worth more money than I could comprehend. My first instinct was to scream, to jump up, to tell someone, anyone, what had just happened. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Sandy had looked at me when I'd asked for my phone back yesterday, that patient expression that said, "Now, Mrs. Grant, you know that's not how we do things here." Maybe it was remembering how Daniel had simply nodded along when the administrator explained that residents' personal belongings were secured for their own safety. Or maybe it was the conversation I'd overheard that morning between 2 staff members. The Grant woman's son wants to sell her house quick. Says she's never going back anyway. Never going back anyway. I folded that ticket very carefully and slipped it back into my coat pocket. Then I sat there for another 10 minutes, pretending to play solitaire on the computer while my mind raced. Daniel thought he'd locked me away. Marissa thought I was a problem they'd finally solved. The staff at Maple Crest thought I was just another elderly woman whose family had made the difficult but necessary decision to put her somewhere safe. But I wasn't locked away. I was undercover. And I had just acquired the most powerful weapon in the world: enough money to buy my freedom and expose the truth about what they'd done to me. The question wasn't whether I was going to fight back. The question was how strategic I was going to be about it. As I walked back to my room that afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't look helpless or confused. She looked like someone with a secret worth $62 million. And for the first time in weeks, Eleanor Grant smiled. Knowledge, I discovered, is a strange kind of torture when you can't act on it immediately. For the next week, I carried that lottery ticket like a burning coal in my pocket while I watched my life being dismantled piece by piece, decision by decision, that I had no part in making. The phone calls came every evening at precisely 6 p.m. Daniel's voice, cheerful and dutiful, checking in on how Mom's settling in. But I'd learned to listen to what wasn't being said. The real estate agent thinks we should list the house at $380,000, he mentioned, casually during Tuesday's call. Market's hot right now. Better to move quickly. As if the house that Thomas and I had bought with our sweat and dreams had somehow become a joint asset requiring Daniel's management. "I haven't agreed to sell anything," I said quietly. "Mom, we've talked about this. You can't go back there. It's not safe." And honestly, the maintenance costs alone are eating up your savings. My savings. The account I'd built penny by penny, tip by tip, overtime shift by overtime shift. The account Daniel now had complete access to, thanks to that power of attorney I'd never actually signed. I want to see the paperwork, I said. There was a pause. What paperwork? The power of attorney. I want to see what I signed. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, you don't remember. We talked about it when you were having those dizzy spells. Dr. Martinez said you needed help making important decisions. Dizzy spells. I'd mentioned feeling lightheaded after my blood pressure medication was adjusted. Once, in passing, and somehow, that had become evidence of incompetence requiring legal intervention. By Friday, the degradation had moved beyond phone calls to actual visits. Marissa arrived with boxes and that particular smile she wore when she was about to explain why something was for my own good. We're just going through some of your things from the house, she said, settling into the visitor chair like she was doing me an enormous favor. Deciding what's worth keeping. Worth keeping. She said it while sorting through photographs of my life. My wedding pictures, baby photos of Daniel, images of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had meant everything to me. This stuff is just collecting dust, she continued, holding up a picture of Thomas and me at Daniel's high school graduation. We thought we'd keep the important ones and donate the rest. Important to whom? But I didn't ask. I was learning the art of strategic silence. The real blow came Monday morning when Louise, my table mate at breakfast, leaned over her oatmeal and whispered, "My daughter visited yesterday. She says there's a 'for sale' sign on your house already. Already. Without my consent. Without even the courtesy of pretending my opinion mattered." That afternoon, I asked Sandy if I could make a phone call. "Of course, Mrs. Grant. But remember, we have to supervise to make sure you don't get confused or upset." Confused. Upset. As if my emotions were symptoms requiring medical supervision. I dialed my own home number, the number I'd had for 43 years. It went straight to voicemail, my own voice, cheerful and welcoming, inviting callers to leave a message for Thomas and Eleanor. But the mailbox was full, probably with calls from my neighbors wondering where I'd gone. "The phone service has been disconnected," Sandy explained gently. "Your son said it was an unnecessary expense." Unnecessary, like my opinions, my preferences, my fundamental right to decide where I lived and how I spent my own money. That evening, I lay in my narrow institutional bed, listening to Louise cry quietly in the next room. At 90, she'd been at Maple Crest for 5 years. Her children visited twice a year, on her birthday and Christmas, bringing flowers and guilt and excuses about why they couldn't take her home. Just yet. The first year, you think it's temporary, she'd told me once. The second year, you realize it's not. By the third year, you start to forget what home felt like. By the fifth year, you wonder if you imagined it all. I touched the lottery ticket in my nightstand drawer. $62 million. And I was trapped in a place where I needed permission to make a phone call, where my own son was selling my life out from under me, where my identity had been reduced to a room number and a daily medication schedule. But here's what Daniel and Marissa didn't understand. I wasn't Louise. I hadn't forgotten what home felt like, and I hadn't forgotten who Eleanor Grant was before they decided she needed managing. I'd raised a son, buried a husband, balanced books that would make accountants weep, and survived every challenge life had thrown at me. I wasn't about to let my own child be the thing that finally broke me. The ticket in my drawer wasn't just a windfall. It was ammunition. And I was about to go to war. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into my imprisonment at Maple Crest. I was in the hallway, moving slowly with my walker, not because I needed it, but because moving slowly had become my form of rebellion against their schedule. When I heard voices coming from the administrator's office, Daniel's voice, clear and confident, the tone he used when closing business deals. The house should close by the end of the month. We've accepted an offer for $375,000. My feet stopped moving. The walker's wheels squeaked to a halt on the linoleum floor. And what about Mrs. Grant's other assets? That was Mr. Calloway, the administrator, speaking in the careful tone of someone discussing a commodity rather than a person. The savings account has about $47,000 left after covering her first 6 months here. There's the old car. We'll donate that for the tax write-off. Some jewelry that might be worth something. Honestly, she's been more expensive than we anticipated. More expensive than they anticipated. I stood there in that sterile hallway, invisible in my generic sweater and sensible shoes, listening to my son discuss my financial worth, like I was a stock that hadn't performed as expected. The good news is, once the house sells, we'll have enough to cover her care for several years. Maybe even upgrade her to one of the nicer rooms on the second floor? A nicer room. As if being sold into a slightly better cage was supposed to comfort me. What if she asked questions about the house sale? Mr. Calloway asked. Daniel's laugh was the sound of my heart breaking. She won't. Mom's getting more confused every day. Yesterday, she asked me 3 times when Dad was coming to visit. I don't think she really understands what's happening anymore. Confused. The word hit me like a physical blow. Thomas had been dead for 26 years. I'd never once asked when he was coming to visit. But in Daniel's version of reality, I was already disappearing into dementia, which made every decision he'd made about my life seem reasonable, even compassionate. Besides, he continued, this is what she would want if she could think clearly. She always worried about being a burden. Now, she doesn't have to worry about anything if I could think clearly. As if my mind had already slipped away, leaving behind only a shell that needed managing. I backed away from that door as quietly as I could, my hands gripping the walker so hard my knuckles went white. In the elevator, riding back to my floor, I caught sight of myself in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at me was small, gray, dressed in the kind of clothes that screamed, institutional resident. From the outside, I looked exactly like what they'd made me, a problem that had been solved. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was powerless. Back in my room, I pulled out that lottery ticket and stared at it until the numbers blurred. $62 million. Enough money to buy and sell everything Daniel thought he controlled. Enough money to hire the best lawyers in the state. Enough money to expose exactly what had been done to me and ensure it never happened to anyone else. That evening, during the supervised phone call I was allowed once a day, I made my choice. Daniel, honey, I need to tell you something, I said, letting my voice carry just the right note of confused vulnerability. I think I lost something important. What is it, Mom? His voice had that patient tone you use with children and people you think can't handle complex information. A lottery ticket. I had it in my coat pocket, but now I can't remember if I threw it away or if someone took it. I keep thinking about those numbers. Mom, you don't need to worry about lottery tickets. We're taking care of everything for you now. We. Always we. As if my life had become a group project he was managing. I know, sweetheart. I had this feeling about those numbers. 7, 14, 23, 29, 31, 47. I've been playing them for 20 years. Those are just random numbers, Mom. Try not to worry about things like that anymore. Random numbers. If only he knew. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my room and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to tell them about the ticket. I wasn't going to reveal my hand until I was ready to play it with devastating precision. Eleanor Grant, the confused old woman who needed managing, was going to disappear. And in her place, a woman with $62 million worth of power was going to rise up and take back everything they'd stolen from her. The war was about to begin. The next morning, I woke up with perfect clarity for the first time in weeks. Not the kind of clarity that comes from acceptance, but the laser focus that comes from knowing exactly what you need to do and having the power to do it. I had $62 million. They thought they had an elderly woman with diminishing capacity. They were about to learn the difference. Step 1 was establishing contact with the outside world without their supervision. During the afternoon, rest period, their euphemism for the time when most residents napped and staff numbers were lowest. I made my move. The maintenance man, Eddie, was replacing light bulbs in the hallway. He was maybe 40, with kind eyes and the gentle manner of someone who'd grown up taking care of people. Eddie, I said quietly, I need to ask you a favor. And I need you to know I'm not confused or having memory problems. He stopped screwing in the light bulb and looked at me carefully. Okay, Mrs. Grant, my son has been telling people I'm losing my mind, but I'm not. I need to make a phone call that no one can supervise or listen to. Can you help me? Eddie glanced down the hallway, then back at me. What kind of phone call? To a lawyer. He was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Grant, I've been working here for 8 years. I've seen a lot of families make decisions they think are best, but I've also seen what happens when someone's still sharp, but everyone treats them like they're not. So you'll help me? I'll help you. But we have to be smart about it. 20 minutes later, Eddie knocked on my door with a maintenance request form. Mrs. Grant, I need to check the electrical outlet behind your nightstand. It'll take about 15 minutes. Once my door was closed, he handed me his cell phone. You've got as much time as you need. My fingers trembled as I dialed directory assistance. I need a lawyer who handles elder abuse cases. The best one you've got. The operator connected me to the offices of Myers, Steinberg, and Associates. When I explained that I needed to speak with someone immediately about power of attorney fraud, they put me through to Evan Myers himself. Mrs. Grant, his voice was warm but professional. Tell me what's happening. For the first time in weeks, I told the complete truth to someone who had the power to help me. I told him about waking up in Maple Crest without my consent, about Daniel selling my house without my permission, about the power of attorney I'd never signed. And then I told him about the lottery ticket. $62 million! His voice sharpened with interest. Before taxes, yes. I haven't claimed it yet because I knew they'd find a way to take control of it too. Mrs. Grant, we need to meet in person. Can you get out of the facility? They think I need supervision to leave the building. Then I'll come to you. But not as your lawyer. Not yet. I'll come as your nephew, visiting from out of town. Can you arrange that? Yes. Good. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. And Mrs. Grant, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't let them know you've spoken to me. Can you do that? For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Mr. Myers, I raised a son, buried a husband, and worked for 30 years in a job where I had to remember every customer's order and coffee preference. I think I can handle keeping one secret. He laughed. I think you're going to be just fine. After I hung up, I sat on my bed and felt something I hadn't experienced since that morning. Daniel had driven me to Maple Crest. Hope. Not the desperate kind that clings to impossible dreams, but the solid, practical hope that comes from having a plan and the resources to execute it. That evening, when Daniel called for his daily check-in, I played my part perfectly. I asked about the house with just the right note of confusion, mentioned how nice the staff was treating me, and even thanked him for taking care of everything. "You sound better tonight, Mom," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. More settled. "I am settling in, honey. This might work out just fine." It was the most honest thing I'd said to him in weeks. It was going to work out just fine for me. As I lay in bed that night, I touched the lottery ticket one more time. Tomorrow, Eleanor Grant would start the process of taking back her life. And Daniel was going to learn that underestimating his mother was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. The hunted was about to become the hunter. Evan Myers arrived at exactly 2 p.m. the next day, carrying flowers and wearing the expression of a concerned nephew. To anyone watching, he was just another family member doing his duty to visit an elderly relative. To me, he was freedom, walking through the front door of Maple Crest Care. "Aunt Eleanor," he said loudly enough for the front desk to hear, kissing my cheek with genuine warmth. "How are you settling in here?" We walked slowly to the garden area, two people having what looked like a pleasant family conversation. But once we were seated at a picnic table well away from any windows or listening ears, Evan's demeanor shifted to pure legal precision. "First things first," he said quietly, pulling out a small tablet. "I need to record your statement about everything that's happened. Then we're going to verify your mental competency with an independent medical evaluation. After that, we're going to systematically tear apart every decision that's been made without your consent." For the next hour, I told my story while Evan took notes that would eventually become the foundation of our case. He asked detailed questions about the power of attorney, the house sale, the financial transfers, and every conversation I could remember. "Here's what's going to happen," he said finally. "Tomorrow, doctor, Sarah Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist, is going to visit you. She's going to conduct a thorough mental competency evaluation. Based on what you've told me today, I'm confident she'll find you fully capable of making your own decisions. And then we file an emergency injunction to stop the house sale, a motion to revoke the power of attorney, and begin the process of getting you out of here legally." "But Eleanor," he leaned forward intently, "we're also going to claim that lottery ticket in a way that protects you completely." He'd already thought through the financial strategy. We would establish an irrevocable trust with an independent trustee before claiming the ticket. The trust would be structured to provide me with a lifetime income while protecting the principal from any future attempts at financial exploitation. Even if someone could somehow challenge your competency in the future, which they can't, the trust ensures your financial security forever. 3 days later, Dr. Chen arrived disguised as a consulting physician reviewing my medications. Her evaluation was thorough and, from the perspective of anyone watching, completely routine. She tested my memory, my reasoning skills, my understanding of complex financial concepts, and my ability to make informed decisions about my own care. Mrs. Grant, she said as she prepared to leave, in my professional opinion, you are not only mentally competent, you're sharper than most people half your age. The idea that you need a guardian or power of attorney is not just wrong, it's insulting. The legal machinery moved quickly after that. Evan filed our emergency motions on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, Daniel's world had begun to crumble. The first call came at 7:30 a.m. I was in the dining room, calmly eating breakfast and listening to Louise complain about the scrambled eggs, when Sandy appeared at my elbow with a worried expression. Mrs. Grant, your son is on the phone. He sounds upset. I took my time walking to the phone, savoring every step. When I picked up the receiver, Daniel's voice was tight with panic. Mom, what the hell is going on? Some lawyer just called me about an injunction. He says you're challenging the power of attorney. Yes, I am. But you can't. You're not. I mean, the doctors said. Which doctors, Daniel? Because Dr. Chen evaluated me yesterday, and she found me completely competent to make my own decisions. Surprisingly sharp, actually. Silence on the other end. The house sale has been stopped, I continued conversationally. The power of attorney has been revoked, and I'll be leaving Maple Crest as soon as the paperwork is processed. Mom, you can't live alone. You're not safe. I'm perfectly safe. What I'm not is free, but that's about to change. This is insane. You don't have the money to fight me legally. And there it was. The real reason he thought he could control me. In his mind, Eleanor Grant was a woman with limited resources who could be managed through a combination of legal maneuvering and institutional authority. Actually, Daniel, I do have the money. Quite a lot of it, as it turns out. What are you talking about? Remember that lottery ticket I mentioned? The one you said was just random numbers? Well, it turns out those random numbers were worth $62 million. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. That's not possible. Oh, it's possible. And tomorrow, when I walk out of Maple Crest as a free woman with full control of my assets, you're going to discover just how possible it is. I hung up the phone and walked back to finish my breakfast. For the first time in weeks, the scrambled eggs actually tasted good. The cottage I rented overlooking Chesapeake Bay was nothing like the house on Danner Street, and that was exactly the point. Where my old home had been filled with decades of family memories and responsibilities, this place was purely mine. A clean slate painted in soft blues and whites, with windows that opened to the sound of water and salt air. I'd been free for exactly 37 days, and I was still getting used to the sensation of making decisions without asking anyone's permission. This morning, like every morning since I'd left Maple Crest, I woke up naturally instead of being roused by some stranger with a medication schedule. I made coffee in my own kitchen, sat in my own chair, and watched the sunrise paint the bay gold through my own windows. Simple pleasures, but after weeks of institutional living, they felt like luxuries beyond measure. The money had changed everything, but not in the ways people might expect. I wasn't buying yachts or jewelry or any of the ridiculous things you see in movies about lottery winners. Instead, I'd purchased something more valuable: complete independence. The trust Evan had established provided me with $200,000 per month after taxes, more money than I could possibly spend, but structured in a way that protected me from anyone who might try to take advantage of my wealth. The principal remained untouchable, managed by a board of trustees who had no personal connection to my family and only one directive: ensure Eleanor Grant's financial security for life. But the real satisfaction wasn't financial. It was sitting on my porch each evening with a cup of tea, reading the letters that arrived daily from other elderly people who'd heard my story. "Dear Mrs. Grant," read the one I was holding now, "my daughter has been pressuring me to sign over my house, saying it's for my own good. After hearing what happened to you, I decided to get a second opinion. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to let anyone make me feel like a burden." Letters like that arrived every day, forwarded through Evan's office to protect my privacy. Stories of adult children who'd assumed control of their parents' lives for their own good. Of elderly people who'd been convinced they were no longer capable of managing their own affairs. Of families where love had been weaponized into control. I'd established a foundation, the Eleanor Grant Elder Rights Foundation, with $5 million of the lottery money. It provided free legal assistance to elderly people facing financial abuse or inappropriate guardianship proceedings. In just 5 weeks, we'd helped 43 people retain or regain control of their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had tried to turn me into a victim, but instead, he'd created an advocate. My daily routine was beautifully ordinary. Mornings were for correspondence and foundation business. Afternoons were for reading, gardening, or simply sitting by the water. Evenings were for cooking, real cooking, not the institutional meals that tasted like cardboard and compromise. I'd also started writing, not a memoir exactly, but a practical guide for elderly people and their families about maintaining dignity and independence while navigating the complexities of aging. The working title was Still Sharp, a guide to growing older without losing yourself. The hardest part wasn't the isolation. I'd chosen that. It was processing the depth of the betrayal. Daniel had called exactly once since I'd left Maple Crest, 3 weeks ago. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes. "Mom, I think we need to talk. I think we've said everything that needs saying. I was trying to protect you." "No, Daniel. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. You can't cut me out of your life forever. I'm not cutting you out. But I'm also not letting you back in until you understand what you did wrong. And I'm not sure you're capable of that kind of honesty." He hadn't called back. Marissa had sent a card, a generic "thinking of you" greeting, with a handwritten note: "We hope you're doing well. We miss you." I'd thrown it away without responding. The silence from Daniel's family was actually liberating. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worrying about their approval, their needs, or their opinion of my choices. I was simply being Eleanor Grant, discovering who that person was when she wasn't defined by her relationships to other people. Some evenings, I'd sit on my porch and imagine what Thomas would think of all this. He'd probably laugh at the cosmic justice of it all. His frugal wife, who'd clipped coupons for 40 years, suddenly having more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I think he'd be proud that I'd fought back. Thomas had always said I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. It had just taken $62 million dollars and the worst betrayal of my life to prove him right. As the sun set over the bay, painting everything in shades of gold and pink, I raised my teacup in a small toast to the woman I'd become and the life I'd built from the ashes of the one they'd tried to take away. 6 months after walking out of Maple Crest Care, I stood in the courtroom where it had all begun and watched as the judge delivered his final ruling on the case that had consumed my new life. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of financial abuse and inappropriate guardianship, Judge Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The defendant's actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, constitute a serious violation of the plaintiff's civil rights and financial autonomy. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confidence from that day at Maple Crest replaced by the hollow look of someone who'd finally understood the consequences of his choices. Marissa wasn't with him. According to Evan, she'd filed for divorce 2 months ago when it became clear that the money she'd thought would secure their future was never going to materialize. The judge continued, "This court orders full restitution for all financial losses, including legal fees, and establishes a permanent injunction preventing any future attempts to assume guardianship or financial control over the plaintiff without clear and convincing evidence of mental incapacity." It was over. Legally, officially, completely over. But as I walked out of that courthouse into the October sunshine, I realized the real resolution had happened months earlier, in small moments of daily choice and quiet reclamation of self. It had happened the morning I woke up in my cottage and realized I hadn't thought about Daniel's approval before deciding what to have for breakfast. It had happened when I'd written my first check to the Elder Rights Foundation without considering whether the expense was responsible or necessary by someone else's standards. It had happened when I'd started ending my phone calls when I wanted to instead of when politeness dictated I should. The woman who'd been deposited at Maple Crest Care 7 months ago, confused, betrayed, diminished, no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone I was still getting to know. Eleanor Grant, lottery winner, foundation founder, and survivor of her own son's attempt to erase her. The transformation hadn't been without cost. Daniel and I hadn't spoken since that brief phone call months ago. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved back to town after losing his job. Apparently, having your financial abuse case become local news wasn't good for a career in banking. He was living in a small apartment, working at a car dealership, and telling anyone who'd listen that his mother had lost her mind and been manipulated by lawyers. Part of me, the mother who'd raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him, grieved for what we'd lost. But a larger part, the part that was learning to value my own dignity above family harmony, felt nothing but relief at his absence. I'd learned something profound about the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness was what I'd felt at Maple Crest, surrounded by people, but stripped of autonomy. Solitude was what I had now. the freedom to choose my own company, my own activities, my own purpose. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We'd helped over 200 elderly people in 6 months, prevented dozens of inappropriate guardianships, and recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets. The work gave my days meaning in a way that worrying about Daniel's approval never had. I'd also reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during the years when my life revolved around being the good mother who was always available, always accommodating, always putting everyone else's needs first. Margaret, from the diner, had become a regular visitor to the cottage. Betty Kowalski, my neighbor from Danner Street, drove out every other Sunday for dinner and updates on the foundation's work. These relationships were different from my relationship with Daniel had been. They were based on mutual respect rather than obligation, genuine affection rather than duty, and the understanding that everyone involved was a complete person worthy of consideration. The house on Danner Street had sold eventually to a young couple with twin toddlers who sent me pictures of the garden they'd planted in the backyard. I was glad it was filled with laughter again, instead of sitting empty, while lawyers argued over its ownership. As I drove home from the courthouse that afternoon, I thought about the lottery ticket that had changed everything, not just the money, though the financial security was life-changing, but what it had given me the power to do: fight back, speak up, and refuse to accept other people's definitions of who I was supposed to be. The ticket was framed now, hanging in my kitchen next to a photo of Thomas and me on our wedding day. Two pieces of paper that represented the bookends of my real life: the love that had sustained me and the luck that had liberated me. But between them was everything I'd built with my own choices, my own courage, and my own refusal to disappear quietly into someone else's version of what my life should be. As I sit here in my cottage by the bay, writing these final words with the morning sun streaming through windows that I chose, in a home that I selected, surrounded by furniture that reflects my taste alone, I want you to understand something important. This story isn't really about $62 million. Yes, the lottery ticket gave me the resources to fight back in ways that most people can't. But the real power, the power that changed everything, came from something much simpler and much more available to all of us: the decision to stop accepting other people's definitions of who we're supposed to be. For too many years, I let Daniel and Marissa convince me that my own judgment was suspect, that my preferences were inconvenient, that my independence was dangerous. I allowed them to reframe love as control and concern as ownership. I confused keeping the peace with keeping my dignity, and in the end, I nearly lost both. But here's what I learned: respect isn't something you earn by being compliant. It's something you claim by refusing to accept anything less. If you're reading this story, chances are it resonates with something in your own life. Maybe you're an elderly person whose adult children have started making decisions for your own good without including you in the conversation. Maybe you're watching your parents lose their autonomy piece by piece to well-meaning relatives who've confused care with control. Or maybe you're somewhere in between, trying to navigate the complex balance between independence and support as you or your loved ones age. Here's what I want you to know: it's never too late to speak up, and it's never too early to establish boundaries. To the elderly readers, Your age does not disqualify your opinions. Your need for occasional help does not negate your right to make decisions about your own life. Your physical limitations do not diminish your mental capacity unless you have a diagnosed condition that specifically affects cognition. And even then, you have rights. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting to maintain control over your finances, your living situation, or your daily choices is stubborn or unrealistic. Don't accept it's for your own good as an answer to questions about decisions that affect your life. And please don't sign any legal documents, powers of attorney, guardianship papers, property transfers, without having them explained by someone who works for you, not for your family. To the adult children, your parents raised you to be independent, thinking adults. Honor that by treating them the same way. Having concerns about your parents' safety or health doesn't give you the right to override their autonomy. There's a vast difference between offering help and assuming control, between expressing worry and making unilateral decisions. Before you decide what's best for your parents, ask yourself, are you protecting them or are you protecting yourself from worry? Are you preserving their dignity or are you prioritizing your convenience? Are you including them in decisions about their lives or are you managing them like children? If your parent is making choices you consider risky, staying in a house with stairs, driving when their reflexes aren't what they used to be, managing finances in ways that seem careless, start with conversation, not control. Offer resources, not ultimatums. Suggest alternatives, not requirements. And remember, a life without risk isn't safety. It's imprisonment. The Eleanor Grant Elder Rights Foundation continues to grow, and we need your help. If you know of elderly people facing financial abuse, inappropriate guardianship, or family members who've assumed control without proper legal authority, please reach out. We provide free legal consultations and can connect people with resources in their area. More importantly, we're building a network of advocates, people who believe that growing older doesn't mean giving up the right to live on your own terms. We need volunteers to help with phone calls, letter writing, and simple companionship for elderly people who've been isolated by families who think they're protecting them. But the most important thing you can do is share this story. Share it with elderly people who need to know they're not powerless. Share it with adult children who need to examine their own motivations. Share it with lawmakers who need to understand how easily our current systems can be abused. Comment below with "My name is mine" if you believe that every person, regardless of age, has the right to self-determination. Tell me about your own experiences with aging, independence, and the challenge of maintaining dignity in a world that often treats elderly people as problems to be solved rather than individuals to be respected. And remember, I was 79 years old when I decided to fight back. I'd been widowed for 26 years, had no legal training, no powerful connections, and no reason to believe I could win against a son who controlled my finances and a system designed to protect him from liability rather than protect me from abuse. But I won. Not because I was lucky, though the lottery ticket didn't hurt, but because I refused to accept their version of who Eleanor Grant was supposed to be. Your name is yours. Your choices are yours. Your dignity is yours. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. It's never too late to take back your life.